They closed the case on a cold, rainy night. The police believed every lead had run dry, that the woman was gone for good, another name left behind on a board. But just as everyone turned away, a police golden retriever stood up. He didn't bark. He didn't struggle. He simply pulled the leash toward a direction the officers had already dismissed. No one could have known that this loyal dog's nose was about to uncover a truth the entire system had missed, and save a life before time ran out. The rain had been falling over Tacoma since dusk, the kind that soaks through coats and patients alike. It streaked the windows of the precinct and turned the streetlights outside into long, tired smears of yellow. Inside the briefing room, no one spoke. Papers lay spread across the table, maps, timestamps, grainy stills from security cameras that showed nothing when you needed them most. The case file sat in the middle, thick and heavy, as if it had gained weight from disappointment alone. Emily Carter had vanished 72 hours earlier after finishing her night shift at St. Anne's Hospital. Her car was found in the employee lot, parked straight, doors locked. Her purse was on the passenger seat. No signs of a struggle, no broken glass. The cameras that should have seen her leave went dark for 6 minutes. 6 minutes that swallowed a woman whole and left the city asking questions the police could not answer. Detective Ryan Holt stood at the far end of the table, sleeves rolled, jaw tight. He had been awake too long. They all had. He recited the facts one last time, not because anyone needed to hear them, but because saying them aloud made the ending feel official. No credible witnesses, no physical evidence, no usable footage. Leads exhausted. Tips dried up. He paused, then said the words everyone dreaded and everyone expected. "We're closing the active search," he said. "The file moves to cold." A few heads nodded. Someone exhaled. Across town, Emily's parents would hear the same sentence phrased more gently, and it would land the same way, like a door shutting. The room began to empty. Chairs scraped back. Rain drummed harder against the glass. Officer Sarah Mitchell stayed seated, her hand resting on the leash at her feet. Cooper, her golden retriever partner, had been lying quietly the entire time, chin on his paws, eyes half closed. He had learned the rhythm of these meetings, the human habit of talking in circles. But as the last detective reached for the door, Cooper stood. He did not bark. He did not whine. He simply rose, ears forward, body suddenly alert, and took one step toward the hallway. Sarah felt the tension travel through the leash. "Easy, boy," she murmured, more out of reflex than concern. Cooper did not ease. He turned his head once, looking back at her, not pleading, not excited, but focused in a way that made her chest tighten. Then he pulled, gentle but insistent, toward the exit. Ryan noticed. "What is it?" he asked, irritation edging his voice. It had been a long night, and he had little patience left for distractions. "He wants to go," Sarah said. "He's picked something up." "From where?" Ryan asked. "We haven't introduced anything new." Sarah hesitated. Cooper had been with her earlier that evening, when she'd walked the perimeter of the old Port District on a hunch she couldn't explain. It wasn't on the board. It wasn't in the plan. But Cooper had slowed there, near a row of shuttered warehouses by the water, and she had made a note she never got to share. "The docks," she said quietly. Ryan shook his head. "We cleared the docks. Twice." "I know," Sarah said, "but he doesn't." Cooper pulled again, firmer now, nails clicking on the floor. Rain thundered as the door opened, letting in the cold and the smell of wet asphalt. Outside, the city waited, indifferent. Ryan looked at the file on the table, then at the dog who refused to lie back down. For a moment, no one moved. The case was closed, the decision made. And yet, in the space between one step and the next, something held them there. An unease, a sense that the story was not finished, no matter what the paperwork said. 5 minutes, Ryan said at last, more to himself than anyone else. That's all. Sarah nodded and followed Cooper into the rain. The leash went taut as he led her toward the parking lot, toward the road that ran down to the water, toward a place the city had already crossed off its list. Behind them, the lights of the precinct glowed warm and final. Ahead, the night stretched on, and somewhere in it, a truth waited, one that had slipped past every camera and every careful eye, but not past a dog who would not let it go. The drive down toward the port took them through streets that looked washed clean by the rain. Tacoma at night could feel quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful, more like the city was holding its breath. The windshield wipers worked hard, and Cooper sat upright in the back seat, steady as a metronome. Sarah could see his reflection in the rearview mirror, those dark eyes fixed on something she couldn't name. Ryan Holt followed in an unmarked sedan, not close enough to feel like backup and not far enough to pretend he wasn't coming. When Sarah had first stepped into the rain, he'd stood in the doorway with that look he wore when he wanted the world to behave. She'd seen it before, men who believed order was the same thing as safety. Tonight, order had failed. They reached the waterfront where the old warehouses crouched along the edge of the water like forgotten buildings from another decade. Chain-link fences ran in long, wet lines. The docks smelled of salt, diesel, and cold metal. In daylight, it was a place of loading cranes and shipping schedules. At night, it turned into a maze. Sarah parked near a gate that bore a faded sign warning trespassers to keep out. Cooper's nose pressed toward the crack in the window before the engine even died. He let out a low sound, not a bark, not a growl, just a breathy insistence that raised the hair on Sarah's arms. "All right," she whispered. "Show me?" The moment she opened the door, Cooper pulled forward, not frantic, not out of control, purposeful. He moved like he had somewhere to be, like he'd been here before, even if his paws had never touched this ground until tonight. Sarah tightened her grip on the leash and followed him along the fence line, boots splashing through shallow puddles. Ryan stepped out of his car and stood under the weak spill of a street lamp. "Mitchell," he called, "we don't have a warrant for half these buildings." "I'm not breaking into anything," Sarah replied. "We're walking." Ryan's mouth tightened. "You said he picked something up. From what? 3 days later? In this weather?" Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't explain the way Cooper changed when he locked onto a scent. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a guess. It was certainty running through muscle and bone. She'd trusted him through drug sweeps and missing person searches in the woods. She wasn't going to stop trusting him now, because the case file said the city had moved on. Cooper led her toward a service road that curved behind a line of warehouses. The building fronts were dark, their windows boarded, their doors chained. Water ran down the corrugated metal like tears. He passed one warehouse without slowing, then another. Sarah expected him to hesitate at random places, to circle and backtrack the way dogs sometimes did when they were overwhelmed by smells. He didn't. Halfway down the block he slowed, then turned his head to the right as if someone had called his name. His body angled toward a narrow alley between two buildings. The alley ended at a door so ordinary it might have been invisible to anyone not looking for it. A side entrance with a rusted handle and a padlock stained by years of sea air. Cooper stopped in front of it and stood still. Sarah's breath caught. There was nothing dramatic about the door, no broken lock, no scratches, no blood. Just wet steel and peeling paint. If you walked past it in a hurry, you'd never remember it existed. Ryan's footsteps approached behind her. He looked at the door, then at Cooper, then at Sarah. "This?" he asked, the skepticism back in his voice. "This is what we're doing?" Cooper sat. That alone made Sarah's stomach tighten. Cooper didn't sit like that unless he was telling her, "This is it." He lifted his head slightly, nostrils flaring, and then he stared at Sarah like he was waiting for her to do the human part. Sarah reached out and rested her palm on the door. Cold, solid. Nothing that would make a detective's heart race. But she could feel her own heart pounding anyway, because Cooper's certainty wasn't an opinion. It was information. Ryan exhaled hard. "We checked these buildings," he said. "My team checked them, and we didn't find a thing." "Your team checked what you could see," Sarah said, keeping her voice calm. She didn't want to fight him. She wanted him to listen. "He's telling me something stayed here." Ryan looked away toward the water, as if searching for patience in the rain. "Mitchell, I'm not trying to be the bad guy. I'm trying to keep this clean. If we step wrong and this turns into nothing, it's going to come back on you. And on me." Sarah knew that. She also knew what closing the file would do to Emily Carter's family. She'd seen it too many times, how grief turned into a slow, bitter kind of waiting. People aged in a matter of weeks. Hope didn't die all at once. It just thinned out until there was nothing left to hold. "We don't have to force entry," Sarah said. "Not tonight, but I need time. 24 hours. Let Cooper work the perimeter in daylight. Bring in K-9 support. Do it by the book." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "You already know what the captain will say." Sarah did. The captain had already said it in the briefing room without even looking at her. Resources were being pulled, overtime was being cut, and the department had to answer to a city that wanted quick results. A dog following a scent trail through an industrial district didn't sound like results. It sounded like desperation. Cooper stood again and pressed his nose to the lower seam of the door, inhaling slowly. Then he looked back at Sarah. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't pleading. It was simply a steady refusal to leave. Sarah swallowed. "If we walk away," she said softly, "and we find out later he was right, I won't live with it. Not again." Ryan's gaze flickered at her words. Not again. He didn't ask what she meant. Ask what? Some histories didn't need to be spoken aloud. He took out his phone and stared at the screen, thumb hovering like it weighed 100 pounds. The easy thing would be to call it in, report an unproductive follow-up, and go home. The responsible thing, he'd tell himself. But the responsible thing hadn't brought Emily Carter back. Ryan lowered the phone. "All right," he said. "You get your 24 hours, but you do it clean. No breaking locks. No hero stunts." Sarah nodded, relief and fear twisting together inside her. "Thank you." Ryan pointed toward Cooper. "And if this goes nowhere, you understand what happens." "I understand," Sarah said. She did understand. The department didn't like embarrassment. It didn't like loose ends. It certainly didn't like an officer betting her credibility on a dog's insistence. Cooper gave a short, quiet huff and turned away from the door as if satisfied. For now. He led Sarah back toward the road, but he kept glancing over his shoulder, marking the place in his mind. As they walked, Sarah looked at the door one last time. It sat there in the rain, plain and silent, holding its secrets with no effort at all. The city had walked past it. The investigators had walked past it. Even she might have walked past it, if not for the steady pull at the leash. In the distance, a foghorn sounded low over the water, and Sarah felt the smallest spark of something she hadn't allowed herself in 3 days. Not certainty, not victory, just the dangerous, necessary beginning of hope. Morning came late and gray, the rain easing into a thin mist that clung to the docks like memory. Sarah returned with Cooper just after sunrise, armed with a borrowed flashlight, a thermos of coffee gone cold, and the thin shield of permission Ryan had carved out for her. 24 hours. No more. She intended to use every minute. Cooper worked the perimeter with quiet discipline, nose low, tail steady, tracing lines that made sense only to him. He ignored the main entrances and the open stretches where trucks once lined up. Instead, he kept drifting back toward the same narrow band of space behind the warehouses, where the ground dipped and the air held a heavier note beneath the salt and diesel. Sarah watched him, saying nothing, letting the leash stay loose. Trust went both ways. They were halfway through the second pass when a voice called out from behind the fence, "You looking for something that ain't there?" Sarah turned. An older man stood near the pedestrian bridge that crossed the service road, a knit cap pulled low, hands tucked into a weathered jacket. He had the look of someone who had learned to be unnoticed, upright but quiet, eyes alert in a way that suggested long habits. "Just walking," Sarah said. "You live around here?" The man gave a dry smile. "Lived near here for 30 years. Worked here longer." He nodded toward the bridge. "Frank Donnelly used to run that gate before they shut the place down." Sarah introduced herself. Cooper glanced up at the sound of Frank's name, then returned to his work, nose lifting slightly as the man stepped closer. Frank watched the dog with interest. "That's a good one," he said. "He's not guessing." Sarah felt a flicker of surprise. "You've worked with K9s?" "No," Frank said, "but I've watched people long enough to know when someone's paying attention." He hesitated, then looked past Sarah toward the warehouses. "You hear about the nurse?" Sarah's shoulders tightened. "Emily Carter." Frank nodded slowly. "I saw your cars the night she went missing. Not here, down the road. But I was on the bridge." Sarah studied his face. He wasn't eager. He wasn't dramatic. He spoke like a man who'd learned that telling the truth didn't always earn you much. "What did you see?" she asked. Frank exhaled. "Didn't see much. That's the trouble. It was late. Rain was worse than this. I heard something first. Metal dragging. Not a crash. Not a slam. More like someone pulling something heavy that didn't want to move." Cooper stopped and turned fully toward Frank, ears forward. Sarah felt the leash tighten by a fraction. Frank noticed. "Then I saw a truck," he continued. "Small, white, I think. No plates on the back. Drove slow, like the driver didn't want attention, turned in by the third warehouse." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Did you report it?" Frank's mouth tightened. "I did. Next morning, officer took my name, wrote it down. Never heard back. Figured it got filed under old man hears things." Sarah didn't correct him. She'd seen too many statements disappear into margins and footnotes. "Would you be willing to say it again?" she asked. "Officially?" Frank nodded. "I've been waiting for someone to ask." Cooper let out a low sound and stepped closer to Frank, nose lifting toward the man's jacket. Frank froze, then chuckled nervously. "I don't smell like trouble, do I?" Sarah smiled despite herself. "He's just listening." They recorded Frank's statement on Sarah's phone, the mist dampening the edges of the screen. As Frank spoke, Cooper remained still, alert, as if anchoring the words to the place around them. When it was over, Frank pointed toward the same side door Cooper had marked the night before. "That one," he said. "Truck stopped near there." Sarah's breath caught. "You're sure?" Frank nodded. "I remember because the light above it flickered. Been doing that for years." By mid-morning, Ryan arrived, coat collar up, skepticism riding him like a second shadow. He listened to Frank with arms crossed, eyes narrowed, not dismissive, but guarded. "Why now?" Ryan asked. "Why didn't you push this?" Frank met his gaze without flinching. "Because when I pushed before, no one leaned back to listen." Ryan said nothing. He looked at the door, the flickering light, the narrow alley. The pieces were small, too small to kick down doors or call press conferences, but together they formed a shape he couldn't ignore. Then Ryan's phone rang. He stepped aside to answer. Sarah watched his expression change, tighten, then flatten. When he returned, his voice was lower. "Emily's parents got a call last night," he said. No voice, just breathing. Then it cut out. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. "That means she's alive." "It means someone wants them to think she is," Ryan said, "or wants us to chase ghosts." Cooper shifted, tail stiffening. He turned his head toward the warehouses again, toward the side door, and let out a short, sharp bark that echoed off the metal walls. Sarah met Ryan's eyes. "He's saying it's not a ghost." Ryan rubbed his face, the fatigue finally breaking through. "All right," he said. "We escalate. I'll try for a limited warrant. No promises." As Ryan walked away to make the call, Sarah knelt beside Cooper and rested her forehead against his. "Good boy," she whispered, not as praise but as reassurance. Cooper leaned into her, steady and warm, as if lending her the confidence she needed. Across the road, Frank watched them quietly. "Whatever's behind that door," he said, "it didn't want to be seen, and it didn't plan on a dog." Sarah stood and looked once more at the plain, rusted door. The case file might still say cold, but the air around them felt charged now, as if the truth had stirred and was waiting to be found. Somewhere nearby a phone rang unanswered, and for the first time since Emily Carter vanished, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt afraid. By afternoon, the rain had thinned to a dull drizzle, and the city seemed to move again, as if nothing had happened. Inside the precinct, however, the air felt tighter than it had the night before. Phones rang more often. Voices stayed low. Emily Carter's name had returned to the board, written again in fresh marker, and that alone changed the mood. Ryan Holt stood with his hands braced on the edge of his desk, reading through a thin stack of reports. The warrant he'd asked for was still pending, stalled by questions and caution. He didn't blame the system. He understood it too well. But understanding didn't make waiting easier. There was one name he kept coming back to: Noah Briggs. Briggs was the night security guard at the hospital parking structure. He was 34, no priors, steady employment, polite to a fault. He had been interviewed once already, early in the investigation, and had come off as helpful, even concerned. His alibi placed him on duty the entire night. Emily disappeared. Badge scans, time logs, and a supervisor's statement all lined up neatly. Too neatly. Ryan called him back in. Noah arrived 10 minutes early, rain beating on his jacket, hands folded calmly in his lap, as he sat across from Ryan in the interview room. He spoke clearly. He made eye contact. He answered questions without hesitation and without volunteering anything extra. When asked about Emily, he shook his head with practiced regret. "She seemed nice," he said. "I saw her walk to her car like usual. Nothing strange." "Did anyone follow her?" Ryan asked. "No, sir." "Any vehicles you didn't recognize?" "No, sir." His answers were smooth, consistent, and utterly unhelpful. Ryan ended the interview feeling the same way he had the first time, empty-handed, with a faint irritation he couldn't justify. Briggs had given them nothing to push against. When a man offered no resistance at all, there was nowhere to apply pressure. Across the building, Sarah sat with Cooper at her feet, listening as another officer relayed updates from the hospital. 2 more cameras had been reviewed. Both had glitched within minutes of Emily leaving her shift. Not broken, not destroyed, just inconveniently offline. "Coincidences stack up," the officer muttered. Then they stopped being coincidences. Sarah felt Cooper stir beside her. He lifted his head, ears angling toward the hallway as footsteps approached. A young woman stepped into view, her coat damp, eyes rimmed red from crying. She clutched a phone in one hand, like it was the only solid thing left in the room. "I'm looking for Detective Holt," she said. Ryan appeared a moment later, surprise flickering across his face. "You must be Mia." Mia Carter nodded. Emily's younger sister looked nothing like the photo taped to the board, where Emily smiled easily, hair pulled back, eyes bright. Mia's smile had vanished somewhere between hope and exhaustion. "They told me not to come," Mia said. "They said you'd call if there was news, but I couldn't sit at home anymore." Ryan gestured for her to follow him. Sarah watched them go, then stood and approached, Cooper padding silently at her side. Mia's voice trembled as she spoke. "Emily texted me that night," she said, holding out her phone. "She said she felt watched. I didn't see it until the morning. When I checked again, the message was gone." Ryan frowned. "Gone how?" "Deleted," Mia said. "Not by me." That got his attention. "Your sister shared cloud storage?" "Yes," Mia said. "We did everything together. I thought maybe I imagined it, but I know what I saw." Ryan took the phone, scrolling through backups, logs, timestamps. The message itself was missing, but there was a gap where it should have been, an absence that spoke louder than any text. Sarah stepped closer. "Do you remember exactly what it said?" Mia closed her eyes. She wrote, "If I don't answer, I'm probably just tired." Then another message came through. "There's someone behind me." The room went quiet. Cooper stood abruptly, tail stiff, and let out a low growl that made Mia flinch. Sarah rested a hand on his back, grounding him. "It's all right," Sarah murmured. "He's reacting to the stress." But Cooper's eyes were fixed on the open doorway, on the corridor that led toward the interview rooms. Ryan followed his gaze. "What is it, boy?" he asked, half under his breath. Cooper didn't answer the question the way humans expected. He turned and walked down the hallway with purpose, stopping at the door of interview room B. Inside, through the glass, Noah Briggs sat alone, hands folded, waiting to be dismissed. Cooper stopped and stared. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. "He's never done that," she said quietly. Ryan's jaw tightened. He looked from the dog to the man behind the glass. Briggs glanced up, noticed the dog watching him, and smiled thinly. Polite, controlled. Ryan opened the door and stepped inside. "Mr. Briggs," he said, "one more thing." Briggs looked up. "Of course." Outside the room, Cooper began to whine, not loudly, but with a sharp edge that carried. Sarah tried to soothe him, but his body remained rigid, every sense trained on the man inside. Ryan asked a few more questions, circled back over the same ground. Briggs answered without slipping. But something had changed. A faint tension crept into his shoulders, a stiffness in his smile when Cooper's whine cut through the wall. When the interview ended, Briggs stood, nodded politely, and left without incident. Cooper fell silent the moment the door closed behind him. Sarah exhaled slowly. "That wasn't nothing," she said. "No," Ryan replied, "it wasn't." As evening settled in, word came down from above. Resources were being reassigned. The department couldn't justify keeping a K-9 tied to a case without fresh physical evidence. Cooper would be pulled back to regular duty. Sarah would be reassigned by morning. Mia overheard the decision and broke down in the hallway. "You can't stop now," she pleaded. "You're the only one still looking." Sarah knelt beside her, torn between duty and something deeper. "We're not stopping," she said, even as she knew how fragile that promise was. Across the room, Cooper lay with his head on his paws, eyes open, alert. He didn't know about budgets or orders or files marked cold. He only knew that the scent he'd found had not faded, and the man who looked too clean had walked past him without looking back. Outside, night gathered again over the city. And somewhere between the hospital parking lot and the silent warehouses by the water, the truth waited, patient, hidden, and increasingly afraid of being found. The order came just after dusk, delivered without ceremony and without apology. Sarah heard it from a supervisor who wouldn't quite meet her eyes, a man who spoke carefully, as if choosing words that might bruise less. "Cooper's being reassigned," he said. "Effective immediately. Patrol support only. You'll report to administrative duty until further notice." Sarah stood there for a moment, the sounds of the precinct blurring into a low hum. Phones rang, a printer whined. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed too loudly. The world did not pause for orders like this. It never did. "And the Carter case?" she asked. The supervisor exhaled. "Another unit will handle it. You've done what you can." "What you can." The phrase landed heavier than he intended. Sarah nodded once, thanked him out of habit, and turned away before her face could betray her. Cooper rose at her side, sensing the shift in her posture, the tightening of her hand on the leash. They walked past the bullpen together, past desks cluttered with coffee cups and case files, past officers who looked up and then quickly looked away. No one said anything. Silence was safer. Ryan Holt was still at his desk, staring at the same thin stack of papers he'd been reading all afternoon. He looked up as Sarah approached and read the decision on her face before she spoke. "They pulled him," she said. "And me." Ryan closed his eyes briefly. "I tried," he said, and she believed him, but belief didn't change the outcome. "He knows something," Sarah said, her voice low. "You saw him with Briggs. You saw the door at the docks. You saw the message gap on Mia's phone. This isn't over." Ryan leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I know, but without a warrant, without evidence that will hold up, they're worried about liability." "They're worried about headlines," Sarah said, "about being wrong." Ryan didn't argue. He couldn't. Across the room, Mia Carter paced with her phone pressed to her ear, voice shaking as she spoke to her parents. She looked smaller than she had earlier, the fight draining out of her with every step. When she hung up, she saw Sarah and hurried over. "They're pulling back, aren't they?" Mia asked. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "For now." Mia's face crumpled. "Then I'll look," she said suddenly. "I know the parking structure. I know the route Emily took. I won't wait while everyone decides it's too hard." Ryan straightened. "You can't do that," he said sharply. "You'll put yourself in danger." Mia met his gaze. "My sister is already in danger." Before either of them could respond, she turned and walked out. Sarah felt a spike of fear cut through her frustration. "I'm going after her." Ryan stood. "You're off the case." Sarah looked at Cooper, then back at Ryan. "I'm not an officer right now," she said. "I'm a sister trying to stop another sister from getting hurt." Ryan hesitated only a second before grabbing his coat. "I'll drive." They found Mia at the hospital parking structure, standing near the stairwell, scanning the shadows like they might speak back to her. The rain had started again, light but steady, the kind that soaked through clothes before you noticed. "Mia," Sarah called softly. Mia turned, startled. "I didn't hear you." "That's the problem," Ryan said. "You don't want to be alone here." Mia swallowed. "I just wanted to see if anything felt wrong." Cooper tugged forward, nose low, tail rigid. He moved past the stairwell and toward a far corner where the lights were dimmer. Sarah followed, heart pounding. Near a support column, something lay on the ground, a thin strip of plastic, torn and damp. Sarah crouched and picked it up. A hospital ID sleeve. Empty. Mia's breath hitched. Emily had one of those. Ryan scanned the area, tension tightening his shoulders. "This shouldn't be here," he said. Maintenance would have cleared it. Cooper growled softly, a warning sound that froze them all. From the far end of the structure came the faint echo of footsteps. Then nothing. "Time to go," Ryan said. They didn't see anyone as they left, but the sense of being watched followed them to the street. Mia clutched the empty sleeve to her chest, tears spilling freely now. "They were here," she whispered. "Whoever took her, they're still here." Back at the precinct, the night felt heavier. Sarah sat with Cooper in a quiet corner, running her hand through his fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "They're telling us to stop." Cooper lifted his head and looked at her, eyes calm, untroubled by orders or politics. He stood, walked a few steps, then stopped and waited, as if inviting her to follow. Ryan watched from the doorway. "You're not going home, are you?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "Not yet." Ryan nodded slowly. "Then neither am I." Somewhere between official duty and personal resolve, the line had finally broken. The department might have stepped back, but the truth had left enough marks now to be followed. And Cooper, pulled from the case and told to forget, did the only thing he knew how to do. He refused to let go. They returned to the docks long after most of the city had gone to sleep. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cold and metallic, the kind that carried sound farther than it should. Sarah parked a block away and cut the engine. For a moment, no one moved. The warehouses stood dark and patient, their shapes softened by fog rolling in from the water. "This is the last time," Ryan said quietly, not as a warning, more like a promise to himself. Sarah nodded. Cooper sat between them, calm, steady, his gaze fixed on the service road ahead. He did not tremble. He did not rush. Whatever had drawn him here before had not faded. If anything, it had sharpened. They entered on foot, flashlights angled low. Every step sounded louder than it should have. Cooper led without pulling, guiding them down the narrow stretch behind the warehouses, past rusted dumpsters and a broken pallet, bleached white by salt. When the side door came into view, he slowed, then stopped. The light above it flickered, just as Frank Donnelly had said. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She scanned the area. No movement, no engines, nothing but the soft lap of water against the pilings. Ryan checked his phone for service and frowned. "Spotty," he murmured. "We keep this clean. Look, don't touch unless we have to." Cooper lowered his head and moved along the wall, nose tracing a line just inches from the concrete. He paused near the corner where the ground met the foundation and inhaled deeply. Then he did something Sarah had never seen him do. He went still, not alert still, not waiting. The kind of stillness that meant certainty had locked into place. Sarah knelt beside him. "Show me," she whispered. Cooper stepped back, then pressed his paw against the ground and scratched once. Not frantic, deliberate. He scratched again, then looked up at Sarah, eyes bright in the beam of her flashlight. Ryan crouched and ran his hand over the concrete. "Feels normal," he said. Then he leaned closer. "Wait." There it was, a faint line, no wider than a pencil, running in a rough square. The surface was smoother here, lighter in color, as if it hadn't aged with the rest of the slab. "This was poured recently," Ryan said. "Not tonight, but not long ago." Sarah's pulse thudded in her ears. "Can we—" Ryan shook his head. "Not without cause." Cooper huffed softly and scratched again, firmer this time. The sound echoed, sharp and final. Sarah looked at Ryan, then back at the concrete. "This is cause," she said. Ryan hesitated. He knew the rules. He also knew what closing the file would mean if they walked away again. He took out his knife, slipped it into the seam, and pried gently. The blade sank farther than it should have. "Damn it," he breathed. They worked carefully, chipping away just enough to reveal what lay beneath. The smell came first, a sharp chemical tang layered with something older and unmistakably human. Ryan leaned back, swallowing hard. "Flashlight," he said. The beam cut into the gap and caught on fabric, folded tight and stained dark. Sarah reached in with gloved hands and pulled out a small bundle. It unfolded to reveal a hospital phone, its screen spiderwebbed but intact. Wrapped with it was a strip of cloth torn from scrubs, and beneath that, a broken name badge. Emily Carter. Sarah's knees weakened. She pressed the badge to her chest, fighting for air. "She was here," she whispered. "Right here." Ryan stared into the hole, his face pale. "We stood on this spot," he said hoarsely. "Twice." Cooper stepped forward and lowered his nose to the opening, inhaling slowly. Then he backed away and sat as if his job was done, at least for now. They filled the gap enough to hide their intrusion and backed away from the door. No sirens, no voices, just the water and the wind. Ryan took photos, marked coordinates, and finally made the call he'd been putting off. "This isn't a theory," he said into the phone. "This is evidence." They waited in the dark for backup, the minutes stretching thin. Sarah sat with Cooper, one hand resting on his shoulder, feeling the quiet strength there. He leaned into her, warm and real, a reminder that some truths didn't announce themselves. They waited to be found. When the first cruiser arrived, lights kept low, Ryan stood and looked back at the warehouse. "We missed it," he said again, softer this time. "Because we were looking for noise." Sarah followed his gaze. "He listened," she said. As officers took over, the night seemed to exhale. The case had cracked open, not with a shout, but with a scratch of paw against concrete, and a door no one thought mattered. Somewhere beyond the docks, answers waited, closer now and far less patient. The room smelled of old coffee and newer fear. Evan Pierce sat hunched at the metal table, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone white. He was younger than Ryan had expected, with tired eyes and a face that looked permanently apologetic. The kind of man who blended into backgrounds for a living. The kind who fixed things quietly and left before anyone noticed he'd been there. Evan had come in on his own. That alone told Ryan more than a dozen surveillance reports ever could. "I didn't hurt her," Evan said for the third time, his voice thin. "I swear to God, I didn't touch her." Ryan didn't interrupt. He let the silence do the work. Sarah stood off to the side with Cooper, who lay at her feet, head up, watching Evan with calm attention. Cooper wasn't tense. He wasn't aggressive. He was simply present, and that presence pressed on Evan harder than any raised voice. "You worked the cameras," Ryan said at last. "Hospital parking structure, port warehouses. Anywhere Noah Briggs needed blind." Evan swallowed. "I fix security systems. That's what I do. People call when something glitches. Sometimes they ask me to make sure it doesn't glitch again." "That night?" Ryan asked. Evan's eyes flicked toward Cooper, then away. That night wasn't supposed to be like this. He exhaled shakily and began to talk. Noah had approached him months earlier, offering cash to clean up camera feeds. Nothing big at first. A missing minute here, a frozen frame there. Evan had debts, medical bills, a loan he couldn't get out from under. He told himself it was harmless. No one was getting hurt. Then Emily Carter saw something she wasn't meant to see. She recognized him, Evan said, voice breaking. Not at the parking structure. Before that, at the hospital, he was stealing meds, small amounts, enough to sell. She saw him come out of a supply room, and he knew she knew. Ryan's jaw tightened. "And you helped him make her disappear." "I helped him make the cameras lie," Evan said. "I didn't know he was going to keep her. I thought he'd scare her, pay her off, something like that." Cooper shifted, letting out a low sound that vibrated through the room. Evan flinched. "Noah told me where he was holding her," Evan continued, words tumbling out now. "An old boat repair shop by the far pier. He said if I talked, he'd ruin me. Said he knew where I lived. Said accidents happen." Ryan leaned forward. "Is she alive?" Evan nodded quickly. "She was, when I last saw her. Weak, tied. He was panicking. He didn't think the dog would find the cash under the concrete." Sarah felt her breath catch. Cooper lifted his head higher, ears sharp, as if the word dog had cut through everything else. "You're going to show us," Ryan said. It wasn't a question. They moved fast after that. Sirens stayed dark as units rolled toward the far end of the port, where the water smelled older, and the buildings leaned into one another like conspirators. Evan rode with Ryan, hands shaking, directions spilling from his mouth in fragments. Sarah followed with Cooper, her focus narrowing to the sound of her own breathing and the steady presence at her side. As they neared the repair shop, Cooper stiffened. Not alarmed, alerted. His head snapped up, nose testing the air through the open window. He let out a short, urgent bark. Ryan slowed the convoy. "What is it?" "He smells her," Sarah said. "And something else." They approached on foot. The building was darker than the rest, windows boarded, a single side door ajar. A length of cable lay coiled near the entrance, out of place, too deliberate. "Trap," Ryan murmured. Cooper growled, a deep warning sound, and stepped wide around the cable, guiding Sarah and the others with him. Inside, the air was damp and close. Tools hung unused. A generator hummed softly somewhere in the back. They found Emily in a small office, wrists bound, face pale but unmistakably alive. She lifted her head at the sound of footsteps, eyes widening with disbelief as Cooper padded into the room. "It's okay," Sarah said softly, kneeling. "You're safe now." Emily's gaze locked on Cooper, and she let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "I knew someone would listen," she whispered. Noah Briggs tried to run. He burst from a rear exit toward the water, but he didn't get far. Ryan and another officer tackled him to the ground as Cooper barked once, sharp, final. Noah thrashed, then went still, the fight draining out of him as cuffs clicked closed. As they led Noah away, Emily was wrapped in a blanket and guided toward the waiting ambulance. She reached out, fingers brushing Cooper's fur. "Thank you," she said, voice barely there. Cooper leaned into her touch, tail wagging once. The night seemed to release its grip then, the tension easing as the truth finally stepped into the light. Evan was led away too, shoulders slumped, relief and dread mingling on his face. He had broken the lie open. He would live with the pieces. Sarah stood with Cooper as dawn began to edge the horizon, the sky paling over the water. The case that had been closed, dismissed, and buried had come apart because one dog refused to forget what he'd smelled. Ryan joined her, looking older and lighter all at once. "He solved it," he said quietly. Sarah nodded. "He did what we couldn't." Morning came softly, as if the city were careful not to disturb what had just been set right. The ambulance lights faded down the road, carrying Emily Carter toward warmth and care and the long work of healing. The docks returned to their ordinary sounds, the gulls, the water, the distant engines, like a stage after the curtain had fallen. Sarah stood beside Cooper and watched the sky lighten over the water. Her hands shook now that there was nothing left to hold together. Cooper leaned against her leg, solid and patient, his breathing slow and even. He had done what he came to do. He did not need to understand what came next. Ryan joined them, his coat still damp, his face drawn but calm. He looked at the old repair shop, at the place where the night had finally given up its secret, and then at Cooper. "We missed it," he said quietly. "We missed it because we were waiting for noise." Sarah nodded. He heard the quiet. Later that day, the precinct filled with a different kind of energy. Not relief exactly, more like humility. Reports were rewritten, timelines adjusted, words like oversight and assumption found their way into official language. Ryan stood in front of the board and said the thing that mattered most. "We were wrong," he told the room, "and if we hadn't listened when we did, we'd still be wrong." No one argued. Mia Carter arrived just before noon. She moved slowly, as if afraid the ground might shift under her if she walked too fast. When she saw Sarah, she stopped, pressed a hand to her mouth, and then crossed the room in 3 quick steps. "Thank you," she said, voice breaking. "They say Emily keeps asking about the dog." Sarah smiled. "He'll like that." Mia hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "There's something else," she said. They recovered this from her things. She played a short audio clip. The sound was rough, half lost to interference. Emily's voice came through, strained but clear enough. "At the port," she whispered. "Side door." The recording ended. Sarah closed her eyes. Cooper lifted his head, ears twitching at the sound of the voice, then settled again. He had known. From the beginning, he had known. By late afternoon, Ryan found Sarah in the training yard, sitting on a low bench while Cooper lay at her feet. The sun had finally broken through, warming the concrete. "The captain wants to see him," Ryan said. "Officially." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Him?" Ryan smiled. "Don't get used to it." The acknowledgement was simple. No speeches, no cameras, a small ceremony in a quiet room, a new tag on Cooper's collar, a firm handshake for Sarah, and then Ryan, clearing his throat, speaking without notes. "This case was solved because someone refused to walk away," he said, "because someone listened when the rest of us couldn't." He knelt then, something Sarah had never seen him do, and rested his hand on Cooper's shoulder. "Good boy," he said. "You heard what we couldn't." Cooper wagged his tail once and leaned forward, accepting the praise with the same calm he brought to everything else. That evening, Sarah drove Cooper home with the windows down, the city moving past them in gold and shadow. The leash lay slack across the seat between them. At a stoplight, she looked over and met Cooper's eyes. "It's over," she said softly. Cooper blinked, content, and rested his head against the door. At the hospital, Emily slept under clean sheets, her sister's hand wrapped around hers. The worst had passed. The rest would take time. Outside, the world kept going, unaware of how close it had come to letting a woman disappear forever. Back at the docks, the side door stayed closed, the new concrete marked and broken open, its secret no longer hidden. The city would remember this place for a while. Then it would forget again. Cities always did, but Sarah would remember the pull of the leash in the rain. Ryan would remember the quiet he'd ignored. And somewhere in the ordinary rhythm of patrols and days, a golden retriever would keep doing what he did best, listening, waiting, and refusing to let the truth slip past unnoticed. Some cases are solved with facts, some with force, and some, finally, with the simple courage to follow a dog who will not let go. Before you leave, take a moment to think about this. If the police had walked away that night, Emily might never have been found. If you believe this golden retriever deserves to be remembered, type 1 in the comments. If you believe listening, really listening, can still save lives, type 0. Your comment helps more people see stories like this. And if you want to hear more true stories about courage, loyalty, and quiet heroes who change lives when no one is watching, please subscribe to the channel and stay with us. The next story is already waiting. Thank you for watching.